Hello health champions. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 signs you're not getting enough fat. And it can be hard to get enough sometimes because the guidelines have always talked about the opposite. They have talked about how carbs are the foundation of our diet, how we should limit fat to less than 30% of calories, but especially we should limit saturated fat, which is one of the safest and most stable, healthy forms of fat that we have. And the only recommendation we get in terms of eating fat really has been to eat some fish oil so we get omega-3s. But why have we never heard about the dangers of eating too many carbs and not eating enough fat? In fact, I think this advice is the greatest disservice humans have ever been rendered. And the history of this is that we started adulterating, we started changing and destroying fat. We started making seed oils and hydrogenated fats and margarine instead of eating the natural healthy animal fats and fats in nuts and avocados and olives. And then people got sick, so now they started demonizing fat, but it was only because they had destroyed it that people got sick. And as a result, when they didn't understand that, now they recommended carbs and low fat, and they suggested that was heart healthy. And as a result, millions of people every year suffer and die. And over the years, we've had tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people suffer and die because of this bad advice. And as I thought about it, it brought to mind something called crimes against humanity. And they define it as a widespread systematic attack such as apartheid or genocide, but also other inhumane acts of a similar character, intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury. And the key word here, of course, is intentionally, because it's kind of harsh to suggest that they did all that on purpose. But on the other hand, how long can you really go and ignore or resist or suppress the evidence before you take it into account and start changing some guidelines? So the first sign that you need to eat more fat is that you have dry, flaky skin and brittle, thinning hair. And the fats that you would need to eat more of are EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. It is DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. It is SFA, saturated fatty acids, MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acids, and then cholesterol. So I've given them a color code here so that it'll be easier to follow along, and we're going to bring these back. So EPA and DHA, they help maintain skin hydration. They reduce inflammation. They maintain cell membrane fluidity. And I've talked a lot about membranes, cell membranes, but you really want to think about the membrane as membrane, as in the thing that actually does the signaling. Because yes, the brain processes information, but it's the cell membrane in the brain that allows the brain and the cell to perform these specific signals. And these two fatty acids strengthen hair follicles, which helps promote shiny hair. Saturated fatty acids form a protective skin barrier which prevents moisture loss. And they're also involved with producing keratin, which is one of the proteins, the tensile strength protein in hair. Monounsaturated fats improve sebum production, which is the skin oils that hydrates the skin and the scalp. They also improve elasticity in the hair, and they reduce oxidative stress in the hair and skin. And cholesterol is also super important for this cell membrane because it contributes to the stability of this cell membrane. So again, anytime that we hear cell membrane, you want to think brain, because this is the structure in the body that allows processing of information. Cholesterol is also necessary for vitamin D production, which helps repair damaged skin and follicles. Hormonal imbalances is the second reason you might need to eat more fat. And here, first we're going to talk about saturated fat and cholesterol. And they are the building blocks for some of the most important hormones that we have, such as testosterone and estrogen and cortisol. And this is why a low-fat diet often is associated with irregular periods, fatigue, and decreased libido. Monounsaturated fats help improve hormone receptor functions, which enable proper cell responses and again, signaling. And in doing that, they're crucial for energy levels and reproductive health. The EPA and the DHA can reduce overall inflammation in the body, but also in certain glands that produce hormones such as the adrenals and the thyroid. And in doing that, they help improve the overall hormonal balance in the body. Sign number 3, you need more fat, is if you have brain fog, reduced memory, or anxiety and depression. And when it comes to EPA and DHA, they are some of the most important structural components of the cell membrane that I've already mentioned. And low levels of these fatty acids have been linked to cognitive decline, to poor memory, and to increased anxiety. And then we have saturated fats, which are super important because they provide stable, long-lasting fuel. And the brain is perhaps the most energy-hungry organ in the body. It's 2% of your body weight. It uses 20% of all your energy. So per gram, it uses 10 times more energy. And if we have fluctuations, then the brain can't function very well, but saturated fatty acids provide a stable level. And this will protect neurons, it will reduce inflammation, it will reduce oxidative stress, and it will stabilize cell membrane. So the EPA and the DHA, it provides fluidity and flexibility, but we need the combination of all these fatty acids to get stability and flexibility. And saturated fatty acids also support myelin production, and myelin is the fatty substance that wraps around all the little nerve wires. So it's kind of like an electrical wire. Without insulation, you can't send signals properly. Monounsaturated fats support blood flow to the brain, which of course increases the nutrient and oxygen supply to the brain, which reduces the tendency of neurodegeneration. So there's a lot to talk about monounsaturated fatty acids or olive oil, but what are the sources? Where do we get it besides olive oil? So olive oil is the best source. It's 75% of the fat in olive oil is monounsaturated, but also avocado is 74%. And maybe a lot of people don't want to eat so many olives necessarily to get their food that way, but you can certainly eat a few avocados here and there. Next closest is almond with 73%, but I wouldn't overdo almonds because it has some other defense mechanism. It has some phytates and plant chemicals in it. So I'm all for almond, but don't overdo it. And then we have canola oil at 64%, which is a great source. Just make sure that you don't buy the regular commercial stuff in the store. You want to get a cold pressed organic canola oil if you're going to eat it. And then there is a huge surprise from most people because we hear so much about how olive oil is good and beef is bad, but beef actually has over 40% monounsaturated fat. And that's not just beef, it's pork, chicken, and fish as well are over 40% monounsaturated fats. And then we have soybean oil at 24%, just over half as much as beef. And then we have safflower oil at 13%. So olive oil and avocado are by far the best sources, but don't discount the others such as animal products. And then when it comes to brain, cholesterol is also super important because it is needed for serotonin and dopamine, which are neurotransmitters. They're chemical messengers that help regulate mood and cognitive function. And very low levels of cholesterol have been linked to cognitive problems and to depression and anxiety. Sign number 4, you need to eat more fat, is hunger and cravings. So we start looking at saturated fats and monounsaturated fats. And what they do is they slow digestion, they improve satiety, they're very, very filling. They also reduce blood sugar swings because they don't stimulate blood sugar or insulin, and therefore they also reduce cravings. EPA and DHA can reduce inflammation and therefore improve insulin sensitivity and also reduce energy crashes, and therefore also cravings. Sign number 5 is weak immune system and frequent infections. So we look at the EPA DHA first. So they help reduce chronic inflammation, and they also help regulate your white blood cells, which are your cellular immune system. Saturated fat helps strengthen cell membranes, which actually makes it harder for bacteria and viruses to get in. So it makes the cell membrane more resilient. And cholesterol is necessary for vitamin D production, which is critical for your immune system and several hundred different things in the body. But if fat is that important, you may be wondering then, how do people on a low-fat diet even survive? And the reason is that you can't really store much carbohydrate on the body. You store fat. So carbohydrates, excess carbs, can be turned into fat. And the way that all animals store fat is as saturated fatty acids and as monounsaturated fatty acids. So we store about 50% saturated and a little over 40% monounsaturated. And that's why you find those same ratios in beef and meat and fish and chicken and humans. So even though the body can make them, it is far better to eat them directly for all the reasons that we talk about in this video. But real quick, they help reduce insulin, they help reduce inflammation, they improve satiety, and they help provide stable blood glucose, stable energy, and stable mood. And another thing a lot of people don't realize is that if you eat more concentrated food with more calories, you don't have to eat so many meals. If you eat very, very low calorie foods, like if you're a horse or a cow, you have to eat all the time. And you can certainly survive on those foods, but it just saves a lot of time and makes life easy by eating concentrated food. Sign number 6 that you need to eat more fat is if you have joint pain and or stiffness. And the EPA and the DHA, they help reduce inflammation, which will reduce joint pain and stiffness. But they may also help reduce autoimmunity, and a lot of more severe joint pain and joint damage in the body can be due to autoimmunity and poor gut function. And by getting enough of these essential fatty acids, we are less likely to have this autoimmunity and these severe inflammatory conditions. Saturated and monounsaturated fats can actually help lubricate the joints. And this is especially true if we get these fats from olives or avocado. Sign number 7 is the lack of the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. And if we eat enough saturated fats and cholesterol, they actually help us with the absorption of these vitamins. And if we don't get enough of those vitamins, that could lead to things like bone loss. It can lead to a weak immune system and also to easy bruising. And these are just a few examples in a very, very long list of what these vitamins do. So the saturated fat and the cholesterol helps absorption to get it out of the digestive tract and into the bloodstream. But then the next step is equally important, and monounsaturated fats help improve the cellular uptake to take it from the bloodstream and into the cell, and therefore it optimizes bioavailability of these vitamins. Number 8 is vision problems and dry eyes. And here, saturated fats and cholesterol, like we said before, helps absorb these vitamins that are absolutely critical for eye health. And the monounsaturated fats we talked about before can help improve blood flow, not just to the brain, but also to the eyes. And that also reduces the oxidative damage to the eyes. But DHA deserves a special mention here because it is so critical for the eye. It is the major component of the retina, of your light-sensitive receptors, the thing that actually converts the light into an electrical impulse for your brain to interpret. And in fact, out of that retina, out of that light-sensitive area, 50 to 60% of it consists of DHA. And that is the highest concentration of DHA of any tissue in the body. The brain has a lot of DHA, but the retina has even more. And this is critical for those photoreceptors to function. And therefore, deficiencies in DHA are associated with visual decline, with dry eyes, and even light sensitivity. So I hope you're starting to see how many functions fats support in the body. So for contrast, let's just real quick go over the 10 signs you're not getting enough carbohydrate in your diet. And here the first one is, and then maybe, actually, there aren't any. There are no essential carbohydrates and there are no signs of a deficiency. So why then is it that we're told to eat 45 to 65% of our calories from carbohydrates? Well, I can't think of a single good reason other than that we are suffering from a global fat phobia. So how much are we actually supposed to eat of carbohydrates and fat? Let's talk about some healthy macros. And let's talk about what the USDA has recommended for the last 50 years or so versus what has come out in the last 10, 15, 20 years from recent research. And this is research from people who are involved in metabolic health, from the holistic medicine people who understand that you can't study the body one system at a time. You have to study the whole because every system collaborates with every other system. From the people in functional medicine who perform a lot of blood tests and actually see what happens when you eat certain foods. From people with a paleo perspective who ask, where do humans come from? What did we used to eat? What have humans eaten for virtually the entire time that we have been on the planet? And last but not least, from the low-carb, high-fat community, the LCHF, who study therapeutic diets that are very, very low-carb or even ketogenic. So we're going to look at fat, protein, and carb first from the USDA, our standard so-called guidelines. But then we're going to look at these alternatives, this recent research, what they suggest for a person who's athletic, for someone who is interested in general health, for good health and longevity, for someone who has some metabolic issues they'd like to reverse, and from people who are having some specific condition, maybe cancer or autoimmunity or something that they like a more therapeutic diet for. So first, the USDA says we should eat between 20 and 35% fat. So I've indicated the range here. The lower end of the range is the solid and the higher end of the range is the dotted. They suggest that we eat between 10 and 35% protein. That seems like a very large range. But then the classic hallmark of the standard diet is they say that we should eat between 45 and 65% carbohydrate. So in the last 30 years, these have not changed much at all. The only thing that has changed is that the ranges have gotten a little bit wider. But now if we look at someone, according to more recent research, who is athletic, they suggest they should eat between 45 and 65% fat, between 25 and 35% protein, and between 10 and 20% carbohydrate. So that's a pretty dramatic difference where the regular guidelines suggest that we should get most of our energy from carbohydrates, and these are populations that are generally sedentary, who do not certainly need carbohydrates, whereas the athletic recommendations more recently are that even if you're an athlete, you probably shouldn't need or have more than 20% of your calories from carbohydrate. And then general health is where most of us would do the best. We would get the benefits of longevity, of insulin sensitivity, of feeling full, of eating whole, real food. And they suggest we get between 50 and 65% of our calories from fat. We get 20 to 30% from protein and between 5 and 20% from carbohydrate. So in other words, this is probably what most of us should eat like. And there are differences. You don't have to lock yourself in or say that this should absolutely work for you. You have to try it out. But if we look at what humans have been eating for most of the time on the planet, something like a paleo hunter-gatherer diet, that's probably very close to the general health group. And then when we look at the metabolic group, now their fat goes a little bit higher, 55 to 75. Protein is about the same, and carbohydrates are still, the bottom end is about 5%. So what that's saying is that you still have a good bit of range here. So 5% would be close to a ketogenic diet, which a lot of people would do well on, but most people probably should not eat more than 20% of calories from carbohydrate, or even less if you're trying to reverse something. And then for the people in the therapeutic group who might have epilepsy or some brain issue or maybe some tumors, then the fat goes all the way from 70% up to 85%. Their protein goes down a little bit because protein can still generate glucose. Excess protein will turn into glucose. And their carbs should be anywhere from 0 or maybe just a couple of percent, because you almost never get 0. Even if you're eating just a few leafy greens, you're getting something. And they should probably not have any more than 10% carbs on the upper end. Sign number 9 would be energy swings and fatigue. And saturated fats and monounsaturated fats should be the foundation of your fuel. That should be where most of your calories come from, because they provide such a steady, long-lasting energy. It is like throwing a log on the fire that can burn for hours and hours and hours, whereas processed foods and carbohydrates and sugar is like throwing gasoline or kindling on the fire. You get a lot of energy all at once, but then it crashes. So the good fats we talked about will prevent energy crashes and reduce the risk of chronic fatigue. The EPA and DHA also contribute, even though they're not really for fuel, but they are signaling molecules. They improve mitochondrial function. And mitochondria is where 100% of your energy is produced. And this is a little confusing to a lot of people, because they've often heard that the mitochondria makes 90% of the energy that's aerobic, but then there is 10% of energy that's anaerobic, that comes from making lactate. So the way that works is aerobic is the energy you make out on the spot, on the fly, and that's with oxygen. But if you are doing a high intensity workout or something very strenuous, now your muscles start burning, you're huffing and puffing. That is when you're in anaerobic, and the burn in the muscles is lactate. So you can generate energy from this, but what most people don't realize is that later on, you still have to break down that lactate, and that happens in the mitochondria. So in the end, 100% of your energy is made in the mitochondria, and it is critical for your health in every aspect to have healthy mitochondria. Sign number 10, you need to eat more fat, is if you have insulin resistance or blood sugar issues. So like we said, the saturated and monounsaturated should be most of your fuel, because it burns stable, so it improves insulin sensitivity. It does not trigger insulin. And it controls blood sugar, so it reduces blood sugar swings. You don't get these crazy ups and downs that you do with carbohydrates. And then the EPA and the DHA will help reduce inflammation in fat cells, among other places. So now if we look at the combined effect of all these 4 fatty acids, now we have a dramatic reduction in insulin resistance, in type 2 diabetes, in hypertension or high blood pressure, and also in cardiovascular disease. And this is one of the biggest reasons people are afraid of fat, because they think it will cause heart disease. They think it will cause all these different things, when in fact, it's the number one thing that will reverse it and prevent it. And we can see a reduction in cancer because, as we're finding out, cancer is both a metabolic and an immune problem. So now that you understand how important these fats are and you want to eat more, how do you find them? Where do you get them? What type of food? So you want to eat meat, fish, and eggs regularly. And when I say meat, I include the game, wild game, and pork and chicken and so forth. And if you eat that meat, you will get saturated fats, you will get monounsaturated fats, you will get cholesterol, but you'll also get small amounts of EPA and DHA. So I've kind of made these lines, this color coding, by either how much is in there or how important it is. What's the significance of that fat in the food? So with fish, we have the EPA and the DHA come first because that's the primary thing that we're looking for in the fish. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but that's like the unique thing in fish. But then fish also has monounsaturated fats, it has saturated fats, and it has cholesterol. The percentage relative to the fat is about the same in meat and fish. It's just that bonus of the EPA and the DHA that we get from the fish. And then with eggs, we're getting the saturated fats, but it is also something that has a significant amount of EPA and DHA. It has monounsaturated fats and, of course, cholesterol, which is what eggs are known for. And then you want to eat nuts and seeds regularly. And what they provide is primarily monounsaturated fats and saturated fats. They do not really have any EPA or DHA. They have a small amount of omega-3s, but since we convert that so poorly, it is not very much we're getting out of those at all. Seeds is the same thing, monounsaturated and saturated. And there are some seeds that have a lot more omega-3s, which make them very healthy, like flaxseed and chia seed. But even though they're beneficial, we don't really convert them very well to the EPA and the DHA. Then you want to eat lots of leafy greens, and they do not really provide any fat whatsoever of significance. But then you can also eat non-starchy vegetables, and that you should eat a lot of as well. And they can provide some monounsaturated fats, but it's not most of them or all of them. It's pretty much olives and avocado that will do that. But you do want all these non-starchy vegetables and leafy greens because they feed your gut bacteria. And if they're not so palatable, let's call it, they're kind of boring, then you want to cook, you want to add some fat, and then they taste absolutely delicious. So you cook with and you add grass-fed butter, extra virgin olive oil. You can add lard, tallow, coconut oil, and avocado oil to them. And the grass-fed butter is going to have saturated fats and some monounsaturated fats. The extra virgin olive oil is going to have, by far the majority is going to be monounsaturated fats. But then they also have some saturated fats in there. And then lard and tallow come from meat, of course. So it's going to have the same fatty acids that it does, but primarily saturated and monounsaturated. And then coconut oil is kind of a thing on its own because it's almost entirely saturated fats, but it's not like the saturated fat in animal products, because coconut oil, of course, is a plant product. And it has a lot of shorter fatty acids like medium chain and short chain fatty acids, which is why it's liquid at room temperature. And avocado is very, very similar to the olive oil, the extra virgin olive oil with monounsaturated and some saturated. So these are the foods that we are supposed to eat. And if you eat a good variety of these different foods, then you will accomplish the healthy macros that I was talking about. Now, when it comes to the EPA and the DHA that we get from fish oil, if you eat fish several times a week, and not just fish, but fatty fish several times a week, like 3 to 4 days a week, then you're going to be covered completely. However, if you don't eat that much fish, I would strongly suggest that you supplement with fish oil and that you try to get maybe 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day. And if you'd like some suggestions for good fish oil supplements, I'll put a couple of links down below for you. If you like this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.